This isn't a fairy tale spun from starlit glances or a serendipitous bump in a bustling market. My story began with an antique grandfather clock that refused to chime and a wrench I couldn't locate. Strange, isn't it? But trust me, that silent timepiece illuminated more about my failing marriage than a decade of whispered vows ever could. It was a Sunday, unusually still. One of those dawns where the light streaked through the window panes just so, making you believe, if only for a moment, that everything was precisely where it should be. I was in our study, kneeling before the stubborn clock, attempting to re-engage the pendulum for the fourth time that month. The gears wouldn't catch, as if they were too weary to propel time forward anymore. Much like myself, perhaps. Behind me, Coralie was on the sun-drenched patio, her voice a hushed murmur. She always took her calls out there now, standing beside the jasmine vines as if they formed a private confessional booth. I used to inquire about the caller. I don't anymore. You can only ask the same question so many times before a stark realization hits. It's not the answer you're avoiding. It's the answer that's eluding you. I abandoned the clock, retrieved my cooling tea, and settled onto the sofa in the living room. My morning pastry lay untouched, crisping into a forgotten husk. So had she, honestly, for what felt like ages. She re-entered the room as if nothing had transpired, as if the silence didn't weigh 1,000 pounds. Her lips brushed my temple. I flinched, an involuntary spasm. She didn't register it. "Anything you need from the boutique?" she inquired, her tone effortlessly casual. I looked at her, truly looked. She was already impeccably dressed, hair perfectly styled, a scent of perfume I didn't recognize clinging to her, and that designer tote slung over her shoulder. Not the canvas one she used for her art classes. This was the one she carried to her weekend workshops. She didn't wait for my reply, simply snatched her keys from the console table and called over her shoulder, "I'll be back in a while." Except she wouldn't be, because this time I followed her. Not in some melodramatic cloak and dagger fashion. I simply slipped into my car and maintained a discreet distance. No elaborate scheme, just pure gut instinct and 1,000 restless nights screaming that I wasn't losing my mind. She didn't head to her pottery studio. She didn't even feign it. She turned into the parking garage of an upscale apartment complex I'd never seen before. Exiting her car, she flashed a smile wider than I'd witnessed in months and strode into the building like it was her second home. No buzz, no hesitation. I parked a few blocks down, near a bustling farmer's market. My hands were trembling, not from a surge of fury, but from an undeniable clarity, from finally seeing the truth I'd been too terrified to acknowledge. 10 minutes later, she emerged with him. Tall, impeccably tailored shirt, his hand resting casually on the small of her back, as if it had resided there for years. They shared a kiss, and I didn't avert my gaze because the truth is, I wasn't heartbroken. I was liberated. She believed I'd be shattered. She thought I'd crumble, but all I felt was an overwhelming sense of release. When she returned home much later that evening, her perfect lips weaving intricate lies about an unexpected art gallery opening, I didn't shout. I didn't weep. I simply stated, "You don't have to fabricate stories anymore." And her response, that was the ultimate betrayal. Here's what no one tells you about closure. It begins the moment you stop believing the lies. That evening, she drifted in humming. Actually humming, a melody I'd never heard, as if the woman who just kissed another man in broad daylight hadn't a single concern in the world. She tossed her tote onto the kitchen island, kicked off her shoes, and cast a little sideways glance, anticipating my usual minor grievance. But I offered none. I merely stood there, nursing the tea I'd allowed to grow cold, observing her as if seeing her for the first time without the distorting lens of my affection. And that's when I articulated it. "You don't have to fabricate stories anymore." She froze mid-step, as if I'd reached into her chest and seized whatever fragile remnants of her illusion remained. For a full 5 seconds, she was utterly silent. Then with a brittle, shaky chuckle, she queried, "What on earth are you babbling about?" I repeated it, my voice calm, deliberate this time. "You don't have to fabricate stories anymore, Coralie. I saw you. I followed you. I know." The color drained from her face, and suddenly the weight of the designer tote over her shoulders seemed to increase tenfold. She attempted a bluff. Saw me where? The apartment complex, the man, the kiss. Every detail. I wasn't raising my voice. I wasn't breaking anything. I wasn't performing the role she expected. And that, more than anything, propelled her into a deeper panic. Oh, come now, she snapped, her voice escalating. So you're now resorting to spying? I didn't set out to, but you weren't even making an effort to conceal it. You walked into his building like you've been doing it for weeks. I placed my mug gently on the granite counter. It clinked louder than I intended. You could have simply told me you wished to end things. I didn't wish to end things, she retorted swiftly. Too swiftly. Then what was that? I pressed. She hesitated. It's not what you imagine. That phrase, that ludicrous, uninspired, overused cliche that people cling to when caught red-handed. It ignited a spark within me I hadn't known was still alive. I shook my head. You know what's truly astonishing, Coralie? It's not even the kiss or the fabrications. It's that you returned here as if nothing had happened. As if I'm merely a background character in your real life. She flinched, not because my voice was loud, but because my words were undeniably true. For months, she'd been emotionally detached, and I'd been desperately clinging to the empty shell of our marriage, foolishly hoping she'd eventually return to me. But she was already gone, simply wearing my surname out of sheer habit. She walked over to the armchair and sank into it, suddenly subdued. It wasn't supposed to unravel this way, she whispered. That was the first genuine statement she'd uttered in weeks. I didn't sit. I couldn't. If I sat, I'd stay. And I wasn't going to remain a mere placeholder in a narrative until something more thrilling came along. You are now free, I stated, walking to the hallway closet and retrieving the duffel bag I'd quietly packed hours prior. And so am I. Her eyes widened. Hold on, what are you doing? I'm not performing the role you meticulously crafted for me, Coralie. I'm not going to grovel. I'm not going to vie for your attention. I'm not going to remain the safe option while you chase whatever fleeting midlife thrill this is. She surged to her feet, stepping towards me. You can't just abandon everything. We constructed a life together. I gazed at her, and for the first time in months, I felt an absolute clarity. You departed from this life a long time ago. I'm simply finally catching up. Then I moved to the front door, opened it, and before stepping through, I added one final remark. Not out of malice, but for a profound sense of closure. Tell him he can have the antique clock as well. It's broken, just like everything else. And I left. I didn't seek refuge at a friend's residence. I didn't check into a lavish hotel. I drove 3 towns over to a modest coastal inn I'd once driven past on business trips, the kind adorned with buzzing neon signs and the faint scent of aged sea salt and old carpet. The woman at the front desk didn't ask probing questions. I provided a pseudonym, paid in crisp cash, and secured a room near the back, shielded from the highway's drone. I hadn't brought much with me, merely enough to sustain me for a few days. I had no foresight of what came next. All I knew was that I couldn't bear to be near her. That first solitary night was profoundly strange. No arguments, no pretense, no treading on eggshells. Just the low hum of the compact refrigerator in the corner and my own thoughts screaming through the profound quiet. I stared at the ceiling until nearly 3 a.m., grappling with the uncertainty of my decision and despising myself for still caring about her perception. But by dawn, something subtly shifted. Not exactly peace, but a peculiar stillness. I wasn't entirely whole, but I wasn't imprisoned either. She didn't call. Not that day, nor the next. But on the third morning, I awoke to 17 missed calls and a deluge of voicemails. The initial few were calm, meticulously rehearsed. Marcus, can we just converse? I believe we both uttered things we didn't truly mean. But the subsequent messages, they began to crack. Marcus, I swear it meant nothing. Please, just respond. You're being overly dramatic. This isn't characteristic of you. And finally, a raw plea. Where are you? What am I supposed to inform people? That last message resonated deeply. Not I miss you, not I apologize, but rather, a blatant concern for her carefully curated image. The performance held more significance to her than the raw truth. I didn't respond. By that evening, she had messaged my sister, my business partner, even my dental hygienist. She began to pull strings, digging, fishing for anyone who could reveal my whereabouts. But I had vanished without a trace. I needed to comprehend who she was without me, not merely who she was with. And the answer arrived faster than I anticipated. Late that night, a soft rap echoed on my motel room door. I froze, my stomach dropping. No one knew I was here. No one except... It wasn't her. It was him, Silas Thorne. The man from the apartment, from the kiss, from her carefully constructed lie. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten me. He simply stood there in the dim hallway light and stated, "She informed me you abandoned her, that you simply gave up." I stared at him, barely breathing. "She departed first." He appeared genuinely perplexed. "She claimed you walked out, said you weren't stable, that she diligently tried to assist you." I almost let out a cynical laugh, not because it was amusing, but because of the sheer speed with which she had rewritten the narrative. In her version, she was the valiant heroine, the patient spouse, the one who maintained composure while I supposedly unraveled. I longed to slam the door in his face, but then he uttered something I will never forget. "I believe she's done this before. You're not the first." Something hollow fractured deep within my chest. I stepped out into the dimly lit hallway. "Why are you revealing this to me?" He merely shrugged. "Because I genuinely thought I was different until I wasn't." Then he extended his hand, holding something small, a flash drive. She was unaware I possessed this. And just like that, he turned and walked away into the shadows. I stared at the tiny device in my hand, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was no longer just about betrayal. It was something far, far deeper, and I was finally braced to confront it. Intrigued, the truth is rarely simple, and what I found next changed everything. I sat on the edge of the in-bed for nearly an hour, simply holding that flash drive. My palms were slick with sweat. I must have flipped it over 100 times, as if gazing at it long enough would somehow prepare me for the revelations it contained. My chest felt impossibly tight, and even though the air conditioning hummed softly in the corner, I couldn't stop a subtle tremor. A desperate part of me wanted to hurl it out the window and pretend that man, Silas, had never appeared. But I couldn't. I needed answers, even if they promised to devastate me. I retrieved my laptop, the same one I'd used to meticulously craft anniversary slideshows for Coralie, the same one she frequently borrowed for her work commitments. I plugged in the drive and waited. It loaded with an agonizing slowness, as if it intrinsically understood the profound weight of what it was about to unveil. There were only 3 files, utterly devoid of labels or folders, just raw, time-stamped video clips. I clicked on the first one. It began in our study, our antique mahogany desk, our bookshelves, her infectious laughter, but not directed at me. It was her and Silas, sitting intimately close, closer than I'd ever witnessed them in any public setting. She was barefoot, her hair casually piled atop her head, a glass of expensive red wine in hand, and wearing the oversized cashmere sweater I'd bought her for Christmas. The one she'd claimed was far too sentimental to ever wear outside the house. They kissed slowly, with a practiced ease, as if it were a routine. Her fingers were entangled in his hair. His hands were beneath the soft cashmere. I paused the video, not because I found it unbearable to watch, but because something in the background caught my eye. The very grandfather clock I had just been trying to fix. It displayed 4:23 p.m. That was the precise moment I was stuck in bumper-to-bumper traffic, returning from picking up her dry cleaning. The exact same day she told me she was working late on a critical team project. I remembered it so vividly because she hadn't even sent a simple thank you text. My stomach churned, but I clicked on the second video. A different day, the same unsettling narrative, the same apartment complex, but a different man entirely, not Silas. This time it was someone older, taller, a senior colleague from her firm. The one she often said reminded her of her own father, and who consistently offered invaluable career counsel. The laughter this time felt forced. She repeatedly checked her phone. My contact name must have been illuminating her screen, a stark reminder of my persistent calls. I vividly recalled phoning her 3 times that night, consumed with worry because she hadn't returned home by midnight. She eventually answered, harshly telling me to cease being so needy. I had previously blamed myself for that agonizing night, for being overly emotional, too clingy. Now I saw her right there on screen, whispering intimately into another man's ear while she deliberately let my calls go to voicemail. I couldn't draw a breath. I wanted to punch something, to scream until my throat was raw, to weep until I was utterly spent. But none of those reactions materialized. Instead, I simply sat there, utterly hollow, as if every truth I thought I knew had been forcibly vacuumed out of my chest. The third file wasn't a video. It was pure audio, just her voice recorded clandestinely, likely on Silas's phone. She was speaking to someone, another woman, perhaps a close confidant. She articulated, "Marcus would never truly leave me. He's far too soft. I could ignite the house, and he'd probably apologize for not handing me the matches sooner." The subsequent laugh, I didn't recognize it. It wasn't merely betrayal. It was an echoing mockery, a chilling contempt. I slammed the laptop shut, surged to my feet, and began to pace the confined room, gripping the sides of my head. I wasn't just a husband who had been cheated on. I was a cruel jest, a walking comfort zone for someone who perceived my inherent kindness as a profound weakness, my unwavering loyalty as sheer stupidity. But not anymore. I wasn't going to beg for closure. I wasn't going to demand answers from her. I was going to orchestrate a sequence of events that would make her profoundly regret ever believing I was the one who would ultimately break. And it began with a single, resolute message I sent to myself from that quiet coastal inn that very night. Subject line: her story ends at dawn. The sunrise over that unassuming inn's parking lot struck me differently that morning. Not peaceful, not gently warming, but raw, like an uncompromising light being forced into a chamber that hadn't seen an honest truth in years. I hadn't slept a wink. I couldn't. The images and sounds from that flash drive replayed in my mind on a relentless loop. Not merely the individual acts of betrayal, but the dismissive, derisive way she had laughed about them, the way she had laughed about me. But I didn't shatter. Instead, I opened a blank document on my laptop and began to write. Not a vengeful manifesto, not a pleading letter to her, but a meticulously detailed record, a stark timeline. Every tiny moment I had second-guessed myself over the preceding year. All the abruptly canceled dinners, the concocted late meetings, the illogical arguments that made no sense at the time, the disparate dots I had never managed to connect. I wasn't constructing a case for a courtroom. I was constructing one solely for myself. I needed to witness it, all of it, without her manipulative influence distorting the hard facts. By noon, I had accumulated 11 dense pages of notes, and that's when a terrifying, yet strangely empowering realization dawned upon me. She didn't just cheat on me, she overtly used me. I had been unconsciously funding her entire self-discovery journey, paying the mortgage and household bills while she played house with men who never lingered long enough to witness the mounting laundry or the mundane realities of daily life. I was her omnipresent safety net, her invisible fallback plan, the dependable man she could always return to after every ill-advised decision. Not anymore. I drove back into town later that day, not towards my home, not towards her, but directly to her high-end boutique fitness studio. She wasn't there yet, but her team was already bustling around. I requested a brief word with her studio manager, a bright young woman named Helena Perry, who had always struck me as surprisingly kind during their holiday client events. I handed her a discreet small envelope containing a thumb drive and a single sticky note that read, "If your loyalty remains with her, incinerate this. If your loyalty is to truth, then observe it." I walked away before she could even formulate a response. Why did I take such a risk? Because I desired for at least one individual close to Coralie to witness her true nature. Not the meticulously curated version she wore like a custom-tailored designer suit. That very evening, I received a text from an unfamiliar number. It read, "You don't know me, but I watched the videos. I'm her assistant. I am so incredibly sorry. She's done this before. You unequivocally deserve better." I had absolutely no idea. Then, another message quickly followed. "She's en route to your sister's bakery. She's in a complete panic." And that's when I definitively understood that Coralie had finally comprehended my genuine absence. Not just physically, but mentally, emotionally. I wasn't passively sitting at home, waiting with doleful eyes and open arms. I was gone, truly gone, and she possessed no playbook for how to manage such an unprecedented situation. I powered off my phone and checked into a different coastal inn. One even smaller, further off the main highway, where no one would ever think to search. I paid in cash once more. No ID, no official record. The following day, my sister messaged me from her husband's phone. "Coralie appeared, attempted a theatrical display of tears, insisting you were unstable." I unequivocally told her to leave. She looked genuinely frightened, as if she couldn't recognize the version of you that has definitively ceased playing the fool. I sat on the inn bed and finally allowed myself a deep, unburdened breath. Not a breath of sheer relief, but one born of newfound control. For the first time in years, I wasn't merely reacting to her machinations anymore. I was consciously making choices that had absolutely nothing to do with her approval, her capricious moods, or her fabricated narratives. That night, I meticulously composed one final message and scheduled it to dispatch exactly 2 days later. It was addressed directly to Coralie. No venomous insults, no desperate begging, no fiery accusations. Just one concise, potent sentence. "You mistakenly thought I'd pursue you. You completely forgot what transpires when the person you utterly depend on no longer requires you." The precisely scheduled message, that single, heavily loaded sentence, departed exactly 48 hours later. I timed its arrival to her phone just as her workday would commence, around 9:04 a.m., when she'd typically be settling into her desk, desperately attempting to pretend her life wasn't quietly imploding around her. I vividly imagined her fingers trembling as she read it, her mind racing, frantically trying to regain control over a situation for which she no longer possessed the script. But I didn't linger to witness her reaction. I was done observing her. This is the untold secret of moving on. You stop needing to watch their next move. Instead, I met with a lawyer, a quietly astute man named Vincent Durant, who didn't flinch or show any surprise when I handed him my exhaustive printout of notes and timelines. He flipped through the 11 pages slowly, his brow furrowing deeper with each incriminating paragraph. After a profound 15 minutes of silence, he looked up, his gaze steady, and stated, "You've been her financial and emotional safety net for far too long, Mr. Denton. It's time to sever those ropes." I had already meticulously removed my name from our joint account the day before. What I hadn't explicitly told her, and what she had likely never bothered to verify, was that the vast majority of our finances were still securely tied to my business account, not hers. I'd instinctively kept it separate years ago, never comprehending how profoundly intelligent that decision would prove to be. She had never genuinely contributed to it, yet she had comfortably enjoyed its pervasive benefits. The house purchased solely in my name, the luxury car she drove, leased directly under my company's umbrella. The only thing she truly possessed was the crushing weight of guilt she had meticulously buried under layers of convenient lies. Vincent advised me to proceed with quiet efficiency, not to forewarn her, not to issue any threats, simply to act decisively. So I did. Over the ensuing 24 hours, I systematically closed our various streaming accounts, transferred the utilities solely into my name, and meticulously scheduled the locks on the house to be changed the following week. Not out of vindictiveness or petty spite, but because I no longer felt genuinely safe knowing she could casually walk into my home at any given moment with the same detached cruelty she had exhibited for months. I wasn't punishing her. I was meticulously protecting myself. On the third day, she finally located me. She appeared at the inn. I don't know how. Perhaps Helena had disclosed my location. Perhaps my sister had eventually caved under pressure. Perhaps she had diligently followed a subtle paper trail I had inadvertently missed. But there she was, standing stoically outside room 19, clad in a crisp white linen blouse, oversized dark sunglasses, and the same familiar perfume she had worn on our very first anniversary. I opened the door slightly and didn't utter a single word. She did. Marcus, not babe, not bug, but my actual name, spoken as if she hadn't articulated it in years. "Can we speak?" she pleaded, her voice distinctly trembling. "Please." I allowed her to enter, not because I felt any lingering obligation to her, but because I desperately needed to see her face to face, to truly comprehend the irreparable distance that had grown between us. She perched precariously on the edge of the chair, pointedly avoiding the bed. She appeared diminished somehow, not physically but utterly deflated. Her customary energy, her practiced control, her undeniable charm, all conspicuously absent. "I made a profound mistake," she began, her voice barely a whisper, "but you're not entirely blameless either." I felt completely unseen, as if I was slowly fading into oblivion within our marriage. "You gradually stopped noticing me." I finally spoke, my voice steady and unwavering. "You are correct. I did gradually stop noticing you, but only after you deliberately began disappearing on purpose." She blinked hard, her composure faltering. "I'm not here to engage in a futile argument," I stated calmly, "and I'm certainly not here to repair anything. I'm merely here to patiently listen to whatever you feel compelled to say before we officially cease being anything at all." Her lips parted slightly, then closed again, unspoken words hanging in the air. She wasn't prepared for my unexpected calm. She needed me furious, needed me utterly broken so she could feel some perverse sense of justification. "I just foolishly thought," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "you'd genuinely fight for me." I nodded slowly. "That's precisely the problem. You genuinely thought you could break me into 1,000 pieces, and I'd still pathetically beg for the shattered remnants?" She began to cry then. Large, silent tears streamed down her face, and for the very first time, I felt absolutely no intrinsic urge to comfort her. I simply handed her a crisp folder, divorce papers already meticulously drafted, her name prominently highlighted, her legal responsibilities clearly outlined. Nothing malicious, just undeniably final. She stared at it as if it were written in an alien language. "I loved you," she uttered, almost as a question, as if seeking confirmation. I nodded again. "And you unequivocally loved being loved." Then I quietly opened the door. She didn't depart immediately, but eventually she did, and this time I didn't linger to watch her go. Act now, release the past, or forever regret the future you could have had. 3 days elapsed after Coralie departed that small inn room, and not a single word emanated from her. No incoming calls, no frantic texts, no desperate emails begging for another chance, or meekly asking if we could simply talk. In that profound silence, it was far louder and more revealing than any of her elaborate lies. I no longer required the sound of her voice to know precisely what machinations were unfolding in her mind. She was meticulously calculating, strategically planning, painstakingly crafting a convoluted version of the story where I was invariably the one who gave up. She would cast herself as the ultimate victim, and the truth would be conveniently relegated to some blurry, ambiguous gray area that no one could definitively prove. But she remained entirely unaware that I had already penned the definitive final chapter. And unlike her, I felt no compelling need to embellish it with unnecessary drama or theatrics. While she remained ominously quiet, I moved with deliberate purpose. Vincent officially filed the divorce papers. I meticulously met with a skilled financial advisor to secure every asset that legally and unequivocally belonged to me. I systematically removed her from all insurance policies, shared bank accounts, and joint memberships. I firmly closed the weighty box of our shared life like a file that no longer required any updating. And then I did the very last thing I had been quietly dreading. I returned home, The house stood exactly as I had left it. Empty. Not in the way one might initially imagine. The furniture was all still meticulously arranged. The lights still functioned flawlessly. The automatic air fresheners still periodically puffed out their artificial lavender scent every 20 minutes, as if nothing profound had fundamentally changed. But it felt profoundly empty, as if she had methodically vacuumed the very soul out of it before gracefully walking out the door for good. I walked into the master bedroom, half expecting to see one of her elegant dresses casually draped over the door, or a half-finished glass of wine sitting on the nightstand, but there was only a single note, folded perfectly, resting precisely in the center of the bed. My name was elegantly scrolled on the front in her delicate, familiar handwriting. Marcus. That was all. I stood there for a considerably long time, staring intently at the note. I didn't want to read it. I didn't feel any pressing need to, but I opened it anyway. Inside, there were 4 succinct lines. You were inherently better than me. You always were. I don't harbor any expectation of your forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I finally genuinely saw it. See, I didn't cry. I didn't clutch the fragile paper emotionally to my chest. I simply folded it back along its original creases, placed it neatly into the nightstand drawer, and quietly closed it. That particular chapter didn't require any rereading. Why failure is often the true key to unlocking your future success. But here's the pivotal part she hadn't accounted for. I wasn't just leaving her, I was definitively leaving the entire fractured version of myself I had willingly become for years. The man who habitually shrank his own presence to meticulously avoid any potential conflict. The man who mistakenly perceived mere crumbs of affection as unwavering loyalty. The man who genuinely believed that staying in a broken situation equated to inner strength. She foolishly believed this painful episode was destined to become her grand redemption arc. That I'd eventually forgive her. That I'd grow bitter, perhaps profoundly miss her touch. Maybe even seek her out one desolate night after too many drinks and weakly utter, "Let's bravely try again." But the sobering truth was, I didn't miss her. I deeply missed me, the vibrant man I used to be before I allowed her to systematically reshape me into someone demonstrably easier to abandon. So I sold the house quietly and remarkably swiftly to a joyous young couple who walked through the front door holding hands and smiling brightly, as if they still wholeheartedly believed in the eternal promise of forever. I didn't inform her. I didn't feel any need to. When she finally reached out a week later, her message was painfully predictable. She didn't ask how I was. She inquired, "Why didn't you bother to tell me you sold the house?" I deliberately waited a few hours before crafting my response. Then I wrote, "You walked out genuinely thinking I'd pathetically beg you to return. I walked out and never once glanced behind me. That house belonged to the man who patiently waited for you. I am simply not him anymore." And then I decisively blocked her number. Not out of lingering spite, but out of profound peace. The specific kind of peace that only fully arrives when you finally cease hoping that the very person who hurt you will miraculously be the one to heal you. I left the city entirely 2 weeks after the house sale officially closed. No grand, performative goodbye, no dramatic social media announcement, no formal farewell. I simply packed what I genuinely needed into the back of my car. A handful of cherished books, a few essential clothes, my trusty laptop, and a dusty old photograph of myself from before I met her, before I irrevocably became the man who twisted himself into someone else's oppressive shadow. I relocated to a charming, small coastal town I had once briefly visited on a memorable road trip years ago. It wasn't glamorous by any stretch. No sprawling malls or trendy coffee shops, just quiet, winding streets, the crisp scent of ocean air, and the specific kind of profound silence that doesn't scream at you. I rented a cozy, compact place situated directly above an independent bookstore, where the amiable landlord occasionally grants me discounts for helping to shelve new titles on leisurely weekends. I now work remotely, diligently build intricate puzzles, and write my own thoughts in the serene mornings. And for the very first time in years, I don't wake up with a suffocating dread tightening in my chest. Strangely, I don't think about her much anymore. Not in the consuming, obsessive way I used to. When her face occasionally drifts into my mind, it's akin to recalling a character from an old story I have long since outgrown. Not with lingering hate, not even with residual pain, just with a palpable sense of emotional distance, and that I profoundly believe is the true, authentic ending. You know what absolutely no one tells you? Closure doesn't magically appear when someone finally offers an apology or provides an explanation. It profoundly arrives when you decisively determine that the story is unequivocally finished and that you genuinely deserve a brand new one. A few months ago, I met someone truly wonderful. Her name is Lydia Bell. She teaches music at a local community center and possesses an endearing habit of always forgetting precisely where she parked her car. She's not perfect by any means. I'm certainly not either. But we laugh abundantly. She asks genuine questions and patiently waits for my complete answers. When I eventually confided in her about my past, the gut-wrenching betrayal, the elaborate lies, the lonely motel rooms, she didn't flinch or offer a pitying gaze. She simply looked at me, her eyes kind, and said, "I'm genuinely glad you found your way out, Marcus. So am I. I suppose I'm writing this not primarily for her, and not even exclusively for myself, but for someone out there who is still desperately holding the door open, foolishly hoping their departed loved one will eventually turn around. Let me articulate it with absolute clarity. If someone truly desired to stay, they would have. You don't have to endlessly chase someone who casually walked away from you with dry, unaffected eyes. You don't have to shrink your authentic self just to painstakingly fit into someone else's inadequate version of love. And you are absolutely allowed to quietly walk away and still emerge victorious, because true peace doesn't make a grand noise, but you will unequivocally know it when you finally find it. What if the quietest exits lead to the most triumphant victories?